Hello, Austin, Texas. My name is Adam Sparks, and I am with AISD for All. We exist to be a voice for equitable education in the city of Austin, and we're trying to achieve that through this video series where we're talking to the educators, teachers, parents, students, former students who constitute AISD. Today, we have Zach Price, who is a 2016 graduate of Anderson High School, went to the University of Texas. While he was there, he ran for the Austin School Board Trustees in District 4, and he is a recent graduate of the University of Texas. Zach, thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, good to be here. Thanks for having me.
So let's start talking about your time as a high school student at Anderson. Did you feel like student voices were valued when you were at Anderson? And did you feel like there were opportunities to give your input on school-wide or district-wide changes?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, the simple answer is no. The longer answer is that it's a hard thing to do. That getting student voices incorporated in the conversation is a hard thing to do. But what's disheartening for me, I feel like a lot of people who care about student voices, is that it doesn't feel like the district has tried particularly hard to get students involved in the conversation. So there are a number of advisory committees that oversee the school district there, volunteer positions, and a lot of them are constituted of primarily parents, teachers, staff, and community members. When I ran in 2018 for school board, there was only one current student on any of those boards across hundreds of openings. Right now, I think there are only one or two. So that's like a really easy numbers data look for a very simple indicator. Students aren't getting involved on at an administrative level at the very least. I can tell you on a campus level that for the most part, students aren't being asked their opinion on the big questions that the district is trying to answer. And I feel like that has a really harsh effect on the priorities that the district and the board decide to lay out. So when they allocate their time, the majority of it isn't going toward the issues that I think that students would say are most pressing, the most pressing needs. All of that is different in a pandemic, obviously, but when I ran, I talked about some of the issues I talked about, like sexual assault and mental health, primarily because they're issues that I never heard administrators at my school or at the district level address, that students care about a whole lot because it's something that's impacting their daily lives.
So if AISD listened to student concerns, what would they learn? What are students talking about, and what specifics do they want addressed in the schools?
That's a good question. You know, I graduated from high school 4 years ago, so I'm officially old and out of touch now. Um, and so, I mean, I can tell you what students cared about when I was a student and what the students that I've known. I mean, my little brother still goes to schools, Austin ISD schools, and a lot of my friends just recently graduated. But what I can tell you is that what students care about are, I mean, some of the things I talked about, when you're talking about the issues that really impact students in a negative way, talk about sexual assault, you can talk about mental health. Students really aren't big fans of testing, in the same way a lot of parents and teachers aren't. But when you talk about the fight against testing, it was almost entirely led from the teachers and parents that didn't care for it. And even among advocates who care a great deal about student concerns, you didn't really see like an elevation of student voices as much as I think might have been appropriate, given they're the ones who have to actually sit down and take the test, you know? Um, so, I mean, I think that's one huge issue. When you saw a lot of school safety debates come up a couple of years ago, in terms of when you saw gun violence on campuses and all of that, a lot of school districts took some really harsh measures against it that really limited student freedom. And I can tell you that students were really incensed. They were angry about it at the time, where they were having to carry an ID with them at all times. It's almost impossible to make it like a 14-year-old carry an ID with them at all times. Having to do things like that that they didn't think were necessarily increasing their safety, but were more measures that were supposed to make the district look good in the event that something happened. And so I think that at the very least, asking people before you put down measures that impact them has a positive effect on the way they receive those measures.
That's a very good point, obviously. And can you tell me then, in that specific case, so 2018, well, there are many different instances of school safety coming up during the past 10 years. Do you feel like, were there any direct outreaches to students about if they, what things could affect their lives that could be implemented?
Again, I wasn't a high school student in 2018, but not a lot that I saw. I mean, that was the most frustrating thing for me. I ran in that year was no, I didn't see district administrators, especially board of directors. Those are elected positions. In my 4 years at Anderson, never met my AISD trustee. I didn't know who she was. I was fairly involved in all sorts of different stuff. I was on like a city council type thing for students in Austin schools. And I actually worked at City Hall when I was a senior in high school, and I didn't know who my trustee was. We never met. And not only never met, like her name never appeared anywhere. Um, there just isn't there just isn't that level of outreach from like an admin level. And like, so students know who their principals are, they know their teachers pretty well. On an individual campus level, there's a decent level of communication, even if individual policies aren't necessarily communicated particularly well in a lot of cases. But from a district perspective, no, I think that there are very few cases of AISD administration effectively reaching out to students and asking for feedback or input or anything before handing down major policies that primarily affect students.
Right now, the conversation about AISD is tapping into the general movement looking at how policing is enforced in our communities. AISD has their own police force. They have 84 full-time police officers, of which 43 are school resource officers. They act like officers in the school, serving to protect students and deal with criminal activity on campus. There are 20 patrol officers, and then there are 2 mental health officers. I know mental health is something that you campaigned on. Talk to us about what students really need and want on campus and what it would look like, and if you support the idea of taking some of the resources that go towards policing and move them in the direction of mental health and other services for the students on campus.
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, I mean, I have talked a lot about mental health. One, because it's an increasingly prescient issue, I think, in our society at large, and two, because it's an issue that affects young people increasingly in a disproportionate way. And in a lot of the way I talk about issues like this, I focus it on the way that we've had these conversations on college campuses. Where, I mean, the situation regarding mental health or sexual assault on college campuses isn't great, but there have been marked strides, market improvements in the way that we talk about these issues, in the way that administrators are forced to grapple with them. And I don't think that high school administrators have gotten it into their heads that that younger teenagers are still teenagers who have a lot of the same issues that need to be addressed. In terms of school safety and allocation of resources, I would be in favor of decreasing a whole lot of things to increase mental health support, and that definitely includes school resource officers. There are places in schools for school resource officers, but primarily in the first place, they should be there to support students in the best way they can. And I think that the biggest student safety issue we have is mental health. I mean, crime exists, and there need to be, there have to be people to step in when that happens. but that's not the primary issue that's confronting Austin ISD students on a day-to-day basis, and where you see a lot of that of the policing happen in Austin ISD and in schools generally are in primarily low-income student schools with that are majority minority, and those students have the least access to healthcare, to mental health care, even though Austin ISD has taken steps to try and increase mental health services in those schools. Those students also have the least access to mental health services outside of the schools. So there's still a pretty large gap there between the services that we're able to provide and we should be providing. And so I think it's a really common sense idea of taking some of the funding right now that we have allocated towards school resource officers who, disproportionately arrests and sends to ISS suspend students of color, and instead allocating those resources toward mental health officers who can help talk down students who are in rough situations. Instead, I think it makes a ton of sense. It's much more learning focused.
Just help someone who doesn't know the world of Austin education. What are the resources available to a student who is experiencing a mental health crisis or has been the victim of sexual harassment or sexual assault currently?
Yeah. So when I was a student, I couldn't have told you, which was my big problem. And I'm really glad Austin ISD has taken some positive steps forward in the last 4 or 5 years. But I I don't recall a time that we were directed toward services for mental health or sexual assault. When I was a student, we talked about mental health. We were having, um, they would have conversations. They showed us like a short movie about suicide, I think, but there weren't like real conversations about, okay, and here's how you actually get help. And the counselors at Austin ISD schools and at schools across the country are primarily guidance counselors. They don't have the time or the training to deal with serious mental health crises. Now, in Austin ISDs and a number of Austin ISD schools, they have put in mental health clinics in the last several years, which I'm really grateful for. And I would love to see an increase in resources for those. I also you just also have to accompany that with conversations to try and decrease the stigma about actually using those resources, and in helping friends use those resources. A lot of people who would never walk into a mental health clinic on their own, but if a friend steps in and intervenes and there's not stigma around it, then they might. So, that's a great resource. Something I talked about when I was campaigning is I would love to see an Austin ISD mental health hotline, the same way college campuses have them, all of that. I think that would be an awesome addition. I think it'd be a really necessary one because students spend so much time not on campus. And that's when, especially if there's not a great home life there, if there's domestic violence, if there's dating violence, if there's anything going on that can have a really disproportionately negative impact on your mental health in the hours that you're not in the outside of the 8 to 5 when you're on a school campus. Sexual assault. I don't know what steps have been made in the last couple of years on sexual assault, except that I haven't heard of any. But when I ran for school board, I I can say that I knew a couple of people who were sexually assaulted in my time in high school by fellow students, and that there were a couple of really awful stories that came out in the couple of years right after I graduated about sexual assaults that happened on campus, around the corner of campus, just focusing on Anderson. There was a really tough story out of Austin High at around the same time as well, and so this is something that's impacting. And for every sexual assault that's reported, especially in this type of demographic, there are a lot that aren't, you know. But I could not think of, and I asked around, and nobody I knew could think of what the heck you do if a sexual assault or sexual harassment was happening. And so I went to the AISD website, and on the website there's just a landing page that says for like sexual assault and harassment, and there was a one-page printable PDF form, and it says you have to physically print it out, fill it out, and then it just says to deliver it to an administrator or other adult at your school. And that's it. It's non-specific about who to deliver it to. As far as I know, there aren't individuals designated who are trained in sexual assault, which is something that you have to get really specific training in to be able to deal with on a personal level. And there is no direction to students about who specifically to report it to. Now, I mean, I hope some of the changes have been made on that in the last couple of years, but if they have been, I haven't heard about them. And I just think that that's one of those issues that, I mean, these both are, but sexual assault especially is one of the issues that I think that the attitude of the district has not changed quickly enough in reaction to the needs of students. I mean, and the needs of faculty as well. I don't, you'd have to ask teachers, but I don't think that there's a, as much training on sexual harassment and assaults on a peer-to-peer basis as they'd like to see either. But it's one of those issues where I think the district could really help itself out by spending a little more time listening to students.
So you ran for school board when you were a sophomore in college at UT?
Uh, yeah.
Okay, yeah. So in 2018, what was your experience trying to get college students to vote and to care about school board, and what message would you have to a college student voting in the AISD school board election?
Yeah, it was hard in my election because I actually wasn't running for the district that overlapped campus. So the students I was trying to get to vote for me were the ones who went to high school with me, and I know a small subset that live at like far west and stuff like that. But also just like my presence on campus, I know a lot of people on campus and all of that. I ended up having people who were like, I tried to vote for you, and then you weren't on my ballot at all. Um, but I have spent a lot of time, most of my time at UT, trying to get students to vote because I think it's really important, and I think it's an area with a ton of room for growth. I think that there's a real I think there's a real misconception about young people and voting. And I can tell you that in basically all of my interactions, and I have spent years at this point working to make voting easier for college students. Young people, college students want to vote. It's not a problem of them wanting to vote. They have incredibly busy schedules. A lot of them are moving, maybe didn't vote for the first time when they were at home, and so are having to vote for the first time in a new county, or did vote and are having to register in a new county. They weren't told they needed to register in a new county and can't vote, weren't told they needed to go through an absentee ballot process. A lot of them don't have the right form of ID or are scared of the really onerous voter ID laws that Texas has on the books. On top of all of that, for a long time, UT specifically only had one polling location on campus. When if you're a college student with a really busy schedule, I can tell you, I worked 2 jobs my entire time as a student. I only ever had an hour and a half on any given day in during the voting hours. Um, when you get to the end of early voting or election day, the line is always longer than that, always. So it's really awesome we were able to get a second polling location on campus. Um, but you're almost always fighting an uphill battle, even with people who care about voting, who want young people to vote, in terms of convincing them that young people actually do want to vote, and that's not the issue there. The message I always give to young people is that, like, why not do it now? Like, why not start now? Like, I think there's this perception that voting is one of those things that you do when you're older. Like, we're right around when I understand taxes and start really drinking coffee, I'll figure out voting. But I mean, there are a whole lot of uninformed adults voting, full-fledged middle-aged adults voting who don't know what they're talking about. And if you spend even 10 seconds looking at the candidates on the ballot, then you'll be more informed than them and showing up to vote. And I also think that seriously, it's not, I don't normally have to give students the hard sell is the easy answer. It's that I have to connect them to the voter registration materials, show them where the polling location is, and get them through the door of it, and they vote at really good rates. At UT, my freshman year, we were the most improved four-year public university in the country for voter turnout. We won awards. I went to DC. I accepted awards on UT's behalf. And then we turned around and did basically the same thing again in the 2018 midterms. And we were starting from a pretty rough place because UT wasn't voting at particularly high rates before. There's a lot of voter suppression that pretty specifically targets young people in Texas. And the work that had been done in the past wasn't really being done for a while in terms of just helping young people vote for like a 4 to 6 year period there. And that's the biggest frustration, is that in a lot of organizing circles, when you build up a capacity, you can maintain it for as long as you want, because the people who do that work stay. But I made it through 2 election cycles on campus, oversaw all this awesome stuff, and I'm gone, and so is everyone I started with. And so there's a tremendous amount of work that has to be put in terms of making sure that people who follow you also know how to register students to vote, how to do a lot of the basic stuff, how to fight UT administration when you have to, and all that. It's these hard steps you have to take. But young people want to vote. And I mean, in terms of down ballot races, they generally, young people care about schools too, actually. And I've never had a particularly hard sell getting them to care, as long as I could point them to a resource that told them what the candidates believe.
Let's, as someone who's run for school board in Austin, let's talk politics for a second. How
Sure.
much money is required in order to win a school board race? And generally, where does that money come from?
How much money it takes to raise a school board race, or to win a school board race, depends entirely on where you're running. Is the answer. It's more than you're going to want it to be, and it's more than it should be. There are basically no rules to raising money in a local school board race, which is insane. And it's something I had to double check myself about 5 times to believe, because it just seems like there should be, I guess. There are a ton of rules for like city council. So I thought that there would be some, and I mean, it's basically the Wild West. For like a district specific race, I mean, I raised, I think $25,000 in my race and lost. I think my opponent raised a little less than that, but she also had the ability to self-fund for about as much as she wanted to. And I knew that I was running up against that my entire time. And so I probably could have raised another $10,000, $15,000, and she would have kept pace with me. If for an at-large position, you're looking at $100,000 to be competitive, is the easy answer. You can get away with less than that, but I can't think of the last time somebody did it and won. Where the money comes from is tough. For the most part, they tell you not to get into this type of race, really any political race, but this type of race, unless you have the address book it takes to raise. I mean, in my case, $25,000, $30,000. If you're running for a district-wide position, $100,000. If you can't raise that money, they'll tell you that. And when I say they, I mean well-meaning people who believe in you will tell you not to get into a race if you don't have that type of money, and if you don't know people who have that type of money. I mean, and the impact that has is that even if the people with the beliefs that reflect yours end up running, you end up with a pretty specific subset of people who can run for a position, especially because school board is a volunteer position that's basically a full-time job. It's the people who can afford to run for that are wealthy, are have jobs where they can take off a ton of time, are retired, are, I don't know, a consultant or somebody else who doesn't actually do anything, and and have like the connections to make a lot of money. Um, and I mean, yeah, in effect, makes the board very wealthy, older, whiter, less representative of who Austin is. I don't think there's anyone on the board right now who's a renter, which is like a really simple, like that's a very simple thing. And there's actually something really wild that happened to me when I was running for office, which is that the incumbent school board member in my district wasn't the biggest fan of me because she was friends with the woman I was running against. But she was going on saying that I shouldn't be on the board because I didn't own property in the district, which was an insane thing for me to hear, because there are so many legitimate hits that you could make on a young person running for office. You know, I think that young people should hold office and run for office, but I was like, so I had been sitting there evaluating all the ways I could be attacked, and the fact that I don't own a home at 20 was not one of them. And it was just insane to me because that was like the first that was the first thing that we undid from the Constitution. We let white men who don't own property vote in like 1800, and uh, in 2020 there's still a pretty decent subset of wealthy people in Austin who think that if you aren't wealthy, maybe you should sit this one out. And so I think that the way that we have financing set up for school board races reflects that. Where the money comes from is other wealthy people for the most part. It's really hard to do a small dollar donation campaign for a school board race because it's hard to get that many people to hear about a school board campaign. The way you do huge small dollar fundraising is by putting a ton of money in the first place to set up a system that allows you to do huge small dollar fundraising. And so there's basically no way to win if you're not coming from a place where either you have money or you know how to get a lot really quickly.
Very good assessment of that. Thank you. So as part of this video series, we're asking all of our interviewees a series of 2 questions. The first of which is, what is one concrete way that AISD can work to increase equity for all students across the district?
It's a really good question. I want to return to something we talked about earlier. I think that one concrete way, especially given everything that's happening in the country right now, one concrete way that Austin ISD could show that they're listening to the community, to students, to parents and teachers right now, is by taking money away from school resource officers and allocating it uh, toward mental health services, toward other critical services. Um, uh, I mean, we know that the presence of school resource officers, the presence of police officers in schools disproportionately affects minorities and low-income students in our schools. And so why not take those resources and allocate them towards something that can increase, they can benefit those students instead?
And the other question to ask is, what is one thing that you want any current school board trustee to know and understand?
Sorry, can you give me 1 sec?
Yeah, of course.
Sorry, is the audio okay on my end? They're doing like yard work next door.
Yeah, it just got a little more foggy a second ago, but it's all right. Now it
All
sounds
right.
fine.
Is it still okay enough?
Now it sounds fine, yeah.
Okay, could you ask the question again? Sorry.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So what is one thing that you would like every school board trustee in AISD to know and understand that they may not otherwise?
That's another great question. I would say One thing I want every AISD trustee to know and understand that I really don't think that they do, is that there are huge subsets, huge swaths of the community who aren't being heard, who want to be heard. And I think that there is a real attitude in politics generally, but especially when you get into low-level politics, that, we've tried our best and we've reached, a certain percentage of people, and anyone that we haven't reached doesn't care enough. And when in reality, the people that you're not reaching are the people who are working two jobs, whose primary language isn't English, who are students who have no idea how to get involved in a process like this, or very young parents or very young teachers. I mean, we have on top of having, young students, we have parents in our district who are in their early to mid 20s and fall into the same subset of young voters who have no idea how to get involved in local school board politics. There's no how-to guide for this. I didn't know how to do it even after having, by the time I ran for school board, I had worked at the state legislature, I had worked for a congressional campaign, I'd worked at City Hall, and I didn't know how to get involved in the school district. And so I think that it's a difficult thing to do, but I don't think we do a very good job of getting a lot of people involved. And I think that the attitude is that those people don't care a particular amount about what's happening. And instead it's that they feel that their voices aren't going to be heard regardless of whether or not they show up. And so it's really, really incumbent on top level administrators, but also especially elected school board members, to go out and seek out those voices.
Well, Zach, thank you very much for taking the time to talk to us today, and for all the many years that you have worked towards trying to improve AISD and Austin in general.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Well, if you like this video and want to see more like it, go to AISDforall.org. That's FOR, AISDforall.org, or you can go to AISD for All on Facebook, where you can see more videos like this and read other articles as we prepare getting towards the 2020 school board election. Thank you so much for watching.